The sun god died every single night for over 3,000 years. Not metaphorically, not symbolically. According to the ancient Egyptians, Ra, lord of creation, master of the cosmos, genuinely perished each evening as Nut, the sky goddess, swallowed him whole. For 12 hours of absolute darkness, he sailed through a realm of the dead, battled a serpent of pure chaos that sought to devour reality itself, and merged his essence with Osiris, the murdered god-king whose corpse ruled the underworld. Only if Ra survived this nightly trial would the sun rise again. Only if the rituals were performed correctly, if Ma'at, cosmic order, held firm against the eternal tide of Isfet, chaos, would tomorrow actually come. The Egyptians never took sunrise for granted. They couldn't afford to. But here's what makes Egyptian mythology extraordinary, what sets it apart from nearly every other ancient belief system. It didn't end when Egypt fell. When Roman soldiers closed the final temple doors in 535 CE, when the last priest carved the last hieroglyphic inscription in 394 CE, when Christianity swept through the Nile Valley and transformed Isis into the Virgin Mary and Horus into the Christ child, the gods didn't die. They transformed. They migrated. They wore new face and answered to new names, but their stories, their symbols, their essential truths about death and resurrection and the triumph of order over chaos continued, hidden in plain sight, woven into the very fabric of Western civilization. Tonight, we trace the complete arc of Egyptian mythology across 35 centuries, from the moment consciousness first emerged from infinite waters to the closure of the last functioning temple. This is not just the story of Ra and Osiris and Isis. This is the story of humanity's first sophisticated theology, the first civilization to promise eternal life to anyone. Not just kings, not just priests, but anyone who lived justly and spoke truth. This is the story of how a people transformed death from an ending into a journey, how they built immortality, not from denial, but from meticulous ritual and unwavering faith. We will witness the sun god's perilous voyage through 12 hours of darkness. We will stand beside Isis as she searches the length of Egypt for pieces of her husband's dismembered body. We will watch Horus, the falcon-headed god, battle his uncle Set in a cosmic legal trial that lasted 80 years. We will enter the Hall of Two Truths, where Anubis, the jackal-headed guardian, weighs each human heart against a single ostrich feather, and where a single lie condemns the soul to be devoured by Ammit, the chimeric demon that is part crocodile, part lion, part hippopotamus. But we will also discover something unexpected, how much we don't know. How the Greek author Plutarch, writing 6 centuries after Cleopatra's death, created the version of the Osiris myth most people know today. The elaborate coffin, the tree in Byblos, the specific details that appear nowhere in Egyptian sources. How the number of pieces Osiris was dismembered into varies wildly, sometimes 14, sometimes 16, sometimes 42, each number carrying its own symbolic weight. How even the Egyptian priests themselves, by the end, could no longer read the hieroglyphic texts carved on their own temple walls, the sacred language having evolved beyond recognition. Let your breathing slow. Allow the modern world to recede like the Nile's floodwaters revealing fertile ground beneath. We are about to journey into a civilization that existed before the pyramids, before Moses, before Homer sang of Achilles and Odysseus. We are entering a world where words held creative power, where knowing something's true name gave you mastery over it, where death was not an ending, but the most important transition a soul would ever make. This story begins in absolute darkness, in boundless water, in the infinite potential of what has not yet become. Before there were gods, before there was earth or sky, before light had ever broken across creation, there was only none. The vast, limitless waters of primordial chaos holding all possibilities in perfect suspension. And then, through an act of will that echoes through eternity, consciousness emerged from that chaos and declared, "I am." In the beginning, the primordial waters of none. Imagine absolute darkness, not the darkness of night, for night implies the existence of day, the memory of light, the promise of dawn. This was the darkness before such concepts existed. A darkness so complete, it was indistinguishable from the water that surrounded it, penetrated it, became it. The ancient Egyptians called this state Nun, and it was both nothing and everything, formless chaos that contained within itself the potential for all creation. Nun was not simply water as we understand it. Nun was the raw material of existence, infinite and undifferentiated, stretching in all directions with no boundaries because boundaries themselves had not yet been invented. There was no up or down, no here or there, no then or now. Time itself waited in suspension within these dark waters, unborn and unmeasured. And yet, paradoxically, Nun possessed consciousness, awareness, the capacity to bring forth what did not yet exist. The Egyptians understood something profound about creation that many other ancient cultures grasped as well, that the world did not emerge from nothingness, but from chaos, from potential, from waters that churned with unborn possibilities, waiting for the moment of differentiation, the instant when something would separate from the undifferentiated whole and declare itself to be. That moment arrived with Atum in the theology of Heliopolis, the ancient city north of modern Cairo. The priests of Heliopolis, whose temple to Ra became one of the most important religious centers in Egyptian history, taught that Atum was the first being to emerge from Nun through an act of pure will. He was self-created, self-generating, complete unto himself. The very name Atum derives from words meaning complete or finished. He was the totality of existence condensed into singular divine consciousness. But how does consciousness emerge from formlessness? How does a being create itself when there is nothing else from which to be created? The Heliopolitan creation myth describes Atum rising upon the Benben, the primordial mound that emerged from the waters of Nun like the first solid ground, like the fertile mud that appeared each year when the Nile's floodwaters receded, leaving behind the rich black soil that made Egypt the breadbasket of the ancient world. This connection was not coincidental. The Egyptians saw in the annual flooding of the Nile a reenactment of creation itself, the waters rising, covering the land in formless chaos, then withdrawing to reveal renewed earth where new life would sprout. Standing upon this first mound, this point of stability in an infinite ocean, Atum began the work of creation. And here the myth becomes intimate, even startling in its physicality. Atum, being alone and complete, contained within himself both male and female principles. To create the first pair of gods, he engaged in an act of self-fertilization. The texts speak of masturbation, or, in other versions, of sneezing and spitting. These images, which might seem crude or comic to modern sensibilities, carried profound theological significance to the ancient Egyptians. They represented Atum externalizing what was internal, differentiating himself into multiplicity, transforming unity into duality. From this act emerged Shu and Tefnut, air and moisture, the first pairing of opposites, the initial step in organizing chaos into cosmos. Shu personified the air, the space between things, the breath that animates life. Tefnut embodied moisture, the vital wetness without which life cannot exist in the desert. Together, they represented the fundamental elements necessary for existence in Egypt's harsh environment. Yet Shu and Tefnut, like children will, wandered away from their father. They disappeared back into the darkness of noon, and Atum, in distress, sent his eye to search for them. The eye that Atum sent was not merely an organ, but a manifestation of divine power, capable of traversing the waters of chaos and bringing back what was lost. While his eye was gone, Atum created a second eye to serve in its place. When the first eye returned, bringing Shu and Tefnut with it, it became angry upon discovering it had been replaced. To appease his first eye and give it greater honor, Atum placed it upon his forehead where it became the uraeus, the cobra that would adorn the crowns of every pharaoh who would ever rule Egypt. The myth takes another fascinating turn here. Upon seeing his children returned, Atum wept with joy, and from his tears sprang the first human beings. This detail reveals something essential about how the Egyptians understood humanity's place in creation. Unlike the gods who were born through divine reproduction, humans emerged from divine emotion, from tears of relief and joy. We are, in this telling, the products of the gods' feelings, linked to them not through creative intent, but through emotional connection. But the Heliopolitan creation was not the only account. In Memphis, the ancient capital of unified Egypt, the priests of Ptah told a very different story, one that elevated thought and speech over physical action. According to the Memphite theology, preserved on a stone now known as the Shabaka stone, Ptah was the supreme creator who brought the universe into being through intellectual conception and verbal command. The ideas that arose in Ptah's heart, which the Egyptians believed was the seat of thought and intelligence, were given form when he spoke their names with his tongue. This Memphis tradition represents one of the earliest recorded instances of creation through divine utterance, a concept that would appear in other religious traditions, including the biblical account in Genesis, where God creates by speaking, "Let there be light." For the Memphite priests, Ptah's creative power was fundamentally intellectual and linguistic. He thought, he named, and through naming brought into being. Even Atum and the Heliopolitan Ennead, according to this tradition, were themselves created by Ptah's thought and speech. In Hermopolis, another major cult center, the priests taught yet another variant. They described the Ogdoad, 8 primordial deities existing as 4 male-female pairs, each representing aspects of the pre-creation state. Nun and Naunet personified the primeval waters themselves. Her and Hauhet represented infinity and formlessness. Kek and Kauket embodied the darkness that preceded light. Amun and Amaunet symbolized hiddenness and the unknown. These 8 gods, depicted as frogs and snakes, creatures that thrived in the watery chaos, came together in cosmic union. Their interaction created the primordial mound from which the sun emerged for the first time, bringing light and order to the cosmos. The Hermopolitan tradition emphasized that creation required the interplay of complementary forces, male and female aspects working in balance. It also highlighted hiddenness and mystery as fundamental aspects of existence, a theme embodied in Amun, who would later rise to become one of Egypt's most powerful gods, precisely because he represented that which was hidden, that which transcended ordinary understanding. In Thebes, which became Egypt's religious capital during the New Kingdom, priests developed a theology that made Amun supreme. They taught that Amun existed before creation in a state of perfect hiddenness, invisible even to the other gods. From this concealed state, Amun brought forth all things, remaining always beyond complete comprehension. The Theban theology emphasized Amun's transcendence. He was described as being beyond the sky and deeper than the underworld, existing before and outside the created order, even while permeating all things. What unites these various creation accounts is their shared understanding that the world emerged from watery chaos through the agency of divine will and intelligence. Whether through Atum's physical self-generation, Ptah's intellectual conception, the Ogdoad's cosmic coupling, or Amun's transcendent hiddenness, creation was always an act of bringing order from chaos, light from darkness, differentiation from uniformity. The cosmological concept of Ma'at, truth, justice, cosmic order, was established at the moment of creation itself. Some traditions describe Shu bringing forth Ma'at as his daughter, making her cosmic order's personification present from the beginning. Ma'at represented the proper functioning of the universe, the correct balance of all things, the opposite of Isfet, chaos, disorder, evil. Every sunrise was Ma'at conquering Isfet. Every successful harvest, every just verdict, every act of kindness reinforced the cosmic order established at creation. And Nun. The primordial waters did not disappear once creation began. They remained always present, surrounding the created world like an infinite ocean, pressing in at the edges, threatening to dissolve the cosmos back into formless chaos if the gods failed in their duty to maintain order. Every night when Ra descended into the underworld, he traveled through waters that partook of Nun's chaotic nature. Every temple was understood to stand upon the primordial mound, a stable point of creation amid the threatening waters. The Egyptians never forgot that order was precarious, that chaos waited always at the boundaries. That vigilance was required to maintain the world's existence. This understanding shaped everything about Egyptian religion and culture. The pharaoh's primary duty was to uphold Ma'at, to perform the rituals that kept the gods happy and the cosmos functioning. The priests maintained the temples where these rituals occurred. The common people made offerings to ensure their place in the ordered world. Everyone had a role in preventing creation from sliding back into the chaos of Nun. The creation myths also established the pattern of divine generation that would populate the Egyptian pantheon. From Atum came Shu and Tefnut. From their union came Geb, the earth god, and Nut, the sky goddess. And here the story takes a dramatic turn that sets up the great mythological cycles that would define Egyptian religion for millennia. But first, we must understand the god who embodied creation's primary gift to the world, the sun god Ra, whose daily journey across the sky and nightly voyage through the underworld structured time itself and gave meaning to existence. Ra, the sun's eternal journey. When the first light of dawn breaks across the eastern horizon, transforming the Nile from black to silver to gold, the ancient Egyptians saw not merely a natural phenomenon, but the daily rebirth of the cosmos itself. That light was Ra, the sun god, emerging triumphant from his nightly battle through the underworld, beginning again his eternal journey across the sky in his solar bark. No god was more central to Egyptian religious consciousness than Ra, whose names, forms, and journeys structured how the Egyptians understood time, death, kingship, and the very nature of existence. Ra was many things at once, a concept that would recur throughout Egyptian theology, where gods were not fixed personalities, but fluid identities that could merge, separate, and take multiple forms simultaneously. He was the creator who emerged self-generated from the primordial waters. He was the supreme king of the gods who ruled from the sky. He was the sun itself, that blazing disk whose light made life possible in the harsh desert landscape. And he was the eternal traveler, whose daily and nightly journeys through sky and underworld mirrored every soul's path through life and death. In the theology of Heliopolis, Ra was often identified or merged with Atum, becoming Atum-Ra, combining the completeness of the first creator with the life-giving power of the sun. This merger reflected the Egyptian understanding that the evening sun, as it descended toward the western horizon, grew old and became Atum once more, while the morning sun, rising fresh and strong, was Ra in his full glory. The sun's daily cycle was thus a microcosm of existence itself: birth, maturity, death, and rebirth, occurring every 24 hours in an eternal rhythm that gave structure to time. But let us follow Ra through one complete cycle, for in doing so, we will understand not only the sun god himself, but the Egyptian conception of how order is maintained and renewed. The journey begins at dawn, at the moment the Egyptians called Khepri. The name Khepri comes from the word meaning to come into being, or to transform. And Khepri was depicted as a scarab beetle, that remarkable insect the Egyptians observed rolling balls of dung across the sand, which they associated with the sun rolling across the sky. As Khepri, Ra is young, newly born from his mother Nut, the sky goddess, who had swallowed him the previous evening. He boards his morning bark, called the Manjet, and begins his ascent into the heavens. Accompanying him are numerous deities who serve different functions: Sia, personifying perception and knowledge; Hu, representing authoritative utterance; Heka, embodying magic and divine power. These are not separate entities, but aspects of Ra's own divine nature, personified as attending gods. As the sun climbs higher, Ra transforms. By midday, when the sun reaches its zenith and the desert heat becomes most intense, Ra appears in his primary form, a man with the head of a falcon, crowned with the sun disk. This is Ra at his most powerful, the sun at noon that sees everything, from which nothing can be hidden. In this form, he surveys his creation, judges what he sees, and dispenses justice and mercy according to his will. The daily journey was not peaceful. At certain points along his route, Ra faced challenges from forces that sought to disrupt cosmic order. Various serpents and demons attempted to stop his bark or slow its progress, but Ra's company of gods protected him, using magic, weapons, and cunning to defeat these threats and ensure the sun's journey continued unimpeded. This was crucial. If the sun's journey were permanently halted, all existence would end, sliding back into the chaos of none. As afternoon waned and the sun began its descent toward the western horizon, Ra transformed again, becoming Atum once more, the elderly creator god, his strength diminished but his wisdom complete. As evening approached, he prepared for the most dangerous part of his journey, the passage through the Duat, the Egyptian underworld. The moment of sunset was liminal, dangerous. As the sun touched the western horizon, Nut opened her mouth and swallowed Ra, beginning his journey through her body, through the realm of death and darkness. He descended into the Duat aboard his evening bark, called the Mesektet, no longer the gleaming gold vessel of daylight, but a darker craft suited to navigating the waters of the netherworld. The Duat was not simply a static realm. It was divided into 12 regions, one for each hour of the night, each with its own geography, its own deities, its own specific dangers. The journey through these 12 hours was described in elaborate detail in funerary texts like the Amduat and the Book of Gates, which decorated royal tombs so that pharaohs could learn the proper paths, spells, and passwords needed to navigate the underworld alongside Ra. The first hours of night were relatively safe. with protective goddesses guarding Ra's bark as it sailed the subterranean Nile. But as midnight approached, the danger intensified. In the 4th hour, Ra entered the realm of Soka, a hawk-headed god of darkness and the necropolis, where the underworld was so profoundly dark that even Ra's light could not penetrate it. Here, Ra had to rely on his voice alone, calling out to find his way. The 5th hour brought Ra to the very deepest part of the Duat, where the waters of noon pressed closest, where the boundary between cosmos and chaos grew thinnest. Here, something remarkable occurred. Ra merged with Osiris, god of the dead and ruler of the underworld. The living sun god and the dead king god became one, symbolizing how life and death, solar power and chthonic power, were ultimately unified in the cosmic order. But it was in the 7th hour that Ra faced his greatest and most eternal enemy, Apophis, the enormous serpent of chaos. Apophis was not simply another demon or monster. He was the embodiment of Isfet itself, chaos personified, the anti-creation force that sought to destroy all order and return existence to the formless waters of none. Every night, without fail, Apophis attempted to devour Ra or stop his journey, to end the cycle of night and day and plunge the world into eternal darkness. The battle between Ra and Apophis was cosmic and eternal. It could never be permanently won because chaos could never be permanently destroyed. It was fundamental to existence, always present, always threatening. The best that could be achieved was temporary victory, driving Apophis back for one more night, ensuring the sun would rise one more time. Various gods aided in this nightly battle. Set, the god of storms and chaos himself, paradoxically fought to protect Ra from Apophis, using his violent nature to defend cosmic order. Mehen, a serpent god who coiled protectively around Ra's bark, also offered defense. The ancient Egyptians believed that this battle was not guaranteed to succeed. They feared that one night, Apophis might triumph, that the sun might fail to rise, that creation itself might end. This is why priests performed specific rituals at certain hours of the night, speaking spells and making offerings to strengthen Ra and weaken Apophis. This is why ordinary people would light lamps and make prayers at the darkest hour. Everyone participated in ensuring the sun's return. After midnight, after the depths of darkness, Ra began his ascent back toward dawn. In the 9th and 10th hours, he encountered the souls of the justified dead, those who had passed the judgment of Osiris and were granted paradise in the field of reeds. These blessed dead called out to Ra, welcoming him, drawing power from his light even in death. In the 11th hour, Ra began his transformation back toward Khepri, the morning form, preparing for rebirth. The 12th hour brought the climactic moment, Ra's emergence from the underworld, his rebirth from Nut's womb, his resurrection into the eastern sky as the new day began. The Egyptians saw in this daily cycle a profound theological truth. Death was not the end but a transition, a journey through darkness that led to rebirth. Ra died every evening and was resurrected every morning, and in doing so, provided the model and the power for all human resurrection. Ra's journey also established the template for the pharaoh's divine role. The king was called Son of Ra, a living incarnation of the sun god on earth. During his lifetime, the pharaoh was identified with Horus, the living god king. But at death, he became Osiris, ruler of the underworld, and simultaneously merged with Ra, traveling through the Duat on the solar bark. Every royal tomb was designed to facilitate this journey, decorated with texts and images showing the correct paths, the proper spells, the necessary transformations. Ra's identity was fluid. merging with other gods in ways that revealed different aspects of divine nature. Ra-Horakhti combined the sun god with Horus of the two horizons, emphasizing Ra's role as lord of the eastern and western horizons, the places of sunrise and sunset. Amun-Ra, the merger of Ra with Amun of Thebes, created the most powerful divine name in New Kingdom Egypt, combining the visible power of the sun with the hidden, transcendent power of Amun. These were not separate gods awkwardly combined, but genuine theological syntheses, revealing how the Egyptians understood that divine nature was fundamentally fluid and multifaceted. The worship of Ra shaped Egyptian architecture, ritual, and daily life. Solar temples, unlike the enclosed dark sanctuaries of other gods, were open to the sky, allowing sunlight to flood the sacred space. The pharaoh's primary religious duty was to ensure Ra's journey continued successfully, which meant maintaining Ma'at, performing the daily temple rituals, making the proper offerings. When the sun rose each morning, it was proof that the pharaoh had fulfilled his duty, that the rituals had worked, that the gods were satisfied. For ordinary Egyptians, Ra's journey provided a framework for understanding their own lives. Birth was emerging from darkness into light. Death was descending into the underworld, but with the hope of resurrection if one could follow Ra's path successfully. Time itself was structured by Ra's journey. The hours of the day and night each had names, associations, specific gods who ruled them. To tell time was to track Ra's position on his eternal voyage. But Ra's daily resurrection depended on something else, on the cosmic order that had been established at creation, on the triumph of order over chaos that had first been enacted in the great mythological cycle involving his own grandchildren. For from Shu and Tefnut had come Geb and Nut, earth and sky. And from Geb and Nut came 4 children who would enact the most important, most repeated, most deeply significant drama in all of Egyptian mythology, the story of Osiris, Isis, Set, and Nephthys. The Ennead, the first divine family. The gods continued multiplying, generation after generation, building the divine hierarchy that would rule both heaven and earth. From Atum had come Shu and Tefnut. From them came Geb and Nut, whose relationship would itself become the stuff of legend and whose children would shape Egyptian religious thought for 3 millennia. Geb, god of the earth, was depicted as a man whose body formed the land itself. Mountains were his bones, valleys his veins, vegetation his hair. He was the foundation of existence, the solid ground upon which all life rested. Nut, goddess of the sky, arched over him, her star-spangled body stretching from horizon to horizon. In Egyptian cosmology, the sky was not above in the sense we might imagine. It was a goddess whose body formed a protective canopy over the earth, who swallowed the sun each evening and gave birth to it each morning. But Geb and Nut's relationship was problematic. They loved each other with such intensity, were so closely intertwined, that there was no space between earth and sky for anything else to exist. The cosmos was compressed, suffocating. Into this situation stepped their father Shu, god of air. In one of the most iconic images in Egyptian art, Shu stands between his children, arms raised, forcibly separating Geb below from Nut above, creating the atmosphere, the space where life could exist. Nut's body arcs overhead while Geb reclines below, and between them is the space, the air, the breath, the distance necessary for creation to flourish. This separation was necessary but painful. Geb and Nut grieved their parting, and tradition held that the rain was Nut's tears falling to embrace her beloved Geb, while earthquakes were Geb's sighs of longing reaching up toward his distant wife. It was cosmic romance of the most literal sort, explaining natural phenomena through divine emotion. Before their separation, Geb and Nut had conceived 4 children, and these 4 would become the most important figures in Egyptian mythology after Ra himself. Their names were Osiris, Isis, Set, and Nephthys, and their story, the murder, the resurrection, the revenge, would provide the template for understanding kingship, death, justice, and the eternal struggle between order and chaos. But here we must pause to understand what these 9 gods, Atum, Shu, Tefnut, Geb, Nut, Osiris, Isis, Set, and Nephthys, meant as a collective. They were called the Ennead, from the Greek word for 9, though the Egyptian name was Pesjet. They represented the great company of gods, the primary divine family from which all cosmic order flowed. Different cult centers had their own Enneads, but the Heliopolitan Ennead, born from Atum, was considered the most important. These 9 were not merely mythological characters or personifications of natural forces, though they were those things. They were also principles, concepts, powers woven into the fabric of reality itself. When the Egyptians told stories about them, they were not engaging in what we might call fiction or fantasy. They were describing truths about how the cosmos worked, about the forces that shaped existence, about the eternal patterns that repeated in both divine and human realms. The Ennead established several crucial concepts. First, that kingship was divine in origin. Osiris would become the first king, and through him all pharaohs would claim legitimacy. Second, that the gods themselves experienced conflict, passion, love, jealousy, and violence. They were not distant, abstract principles, but engaged, emotional personalities who struggled with the same forces that challenged humanity. Third, that death was not an ending, but a transformation. That resurrection was possible, that justice could be restored even after catastrophic injustice. Osiris, the eldest, was described as a good and wise king who ruled Egypt during a golden age. He taught humanity agriculture, law, religion, and all the civilized arts. Under his rule, Egypt flourished. He was depicted as a man with green or black skin. Green representing vegetation and rebirth, black representing the fertile Nile mud and the rich soil of Egypt. His wife was his sister Isis, a common practice among the gods and later among Egyptian royalty, meant to keep divine blood pure and power concentrated. Isis was wisdom incarnate, the greatest magician among all the gods, whose knowledge and skill would prove crucial in the drama to come. She represented the ideal wife, sister, mother, protective, faithful, resourceful. But she was no passive figure. Her power rivaled the gods themselves, and some traditions held she learned Ra's secret name through trickery, thereby gaining power over the king of the gods himself. Set, their brother, was a more complex figure. In earliest traditions, Set was a necessary force, god of chaos, storms, the desert, foreign lands. He represented the violent, unpredictable aspects of nature that nonetheless had their place in cosmic order. Set protected Ra's bark from Apophis. Set embodied the strength needed to defend Egypt from external threats. But Set was also jealous, ambitious, and as the stories developed, increasingly identified with evil itself. Nephthys, their sister and Set's wife, was a gentler figure, associated with the night, mourning, and service to the dead. She often appeared alongside Isis, particularly in funerary contexts, and despite being married to Set, she remained loyal to Isis and Osiris when the great tragedy occurred. Some traditions held that she and Osiris had a son, Anubis, the jackal-headed god of embalming, from a union that occurred when Nephthys disguised herself as Isis. These four siblings, with their complex relationships, their intertwined destinies, would enact a drama that every Egyptian knew, that shaped how they understood power, betrayal, love, death, and resurrection. And that drama begins with jealousy, with Set's growing resentment of his brother's rule, with a murder that would shake the cosmos and change the nature of existence itself. Osiris, Isis, and the great myth cycle. Osiris ruled as king with justice and wisdom. The land flourished under his care. The Nile rose and fell in its season. The crops grew abundant. The people lived in harmony under Ma'at. He was the ideal ruler, the perfect embodiment of kingship, teaching humanity not only agriculture, but law, religion, and all the civilized arts that separated them from chaos. His wife Isis stood beside him, equally revered, her magical knowledge complementing his righteous rule. Together they represented the divine order that Egypt would always seek to maintain. But Set watched his brother's success with growing resentment. The myths are not entirely clear about Set's motivations. Was it simple jealousy of Osiris's throne? Was it deeper, a fundamental opposition between order and chaos that Set embodied? Did Set see himself as equally qualified, unfairly overlooked? The texts leave room for interpretation, but the result was unambiguous. Set, determined to kill his brother and seize the throne for himself. The murder itself is described in various ways in different sources, and this variation is significant. The ancient Egyptians believed written words held power. To write something, especially something terrible, was to risk making it more real. Therefore, they often alluded to Osiris's death rather than describing it directly, speaking around the event, referring to it obliquely. Some accounts suggest Set transformed into a dangerous animal, a crocodile or wild bull, and attacked Osiris. Others imply Osiris was drowned. The fullest account comes from the Greek writer Plutarch, writing centuries after the myth's origins, but preserving traditions that may be authentic. The most complete account of the murder comes from the Greek-Roman author Plutarch, writing his treatise on Isis and Osiris around 100 CE, more than a millennium after the myth's origins. What makes this significant is that we must acknowledge Plutarch as an outsider to Egyptian culture, writing for a Greek audience, possibly embellishing or misunderstanding elements of traditions he heard from Egyptian priests. His version became the most famous telling, but it may not reflect exactly what ancient Egyptians believed. Still, it likely preserves genuine traditions, as Plutarch claimed to draw on Egyptian sources. In Plutarch's account, Set conspired with 72 accomplices to murder Osiris through elaborate deception. Set commissioned craftsmen to create a magnificent sarcophagus, ornately decorated and sized precisely to Osiris's exact measurements. During a lavish feast where both brothers were present, Set announced that this beautiful chest would be gifted to whoever fit inside it perfectly. The guests, one by one, climbed into the coffin and found it too large or too small, until Osiris, unsuspecting and encouraged by the assembled company, lay down inst and discovered it matched his body exactly. The trap snapped shut. Set's conspirators slammed the lid, sealed it with molten lead, and cast the sarcophagus into the Nile. Osiris drowned within his own would-be tomb, murdered through trickery rather than honest combat. A violation not just of brotherhood, but of Ma'at itself. Set immediately declared himself king, seizing the throne through regicide, while his brother's body drifted downstream toward the Mediterranean. When word reached Isis, her grief was absolute. But grief, for Isis, transformed immediately into action. Drawing on magical knowledge that rivaled even the gods, she set out to find Osiris's body, determined to restore him through any means necessary. The search led Isis throughout Egypt and beyond. Plutarch's account, And here again, we're relying on a much later Greek source describing Egyptian beliefs. Tells us the sarcophagus washed ashore at Byblos on the Phoenician coast. There, a tamarisk tree grew around it with supernatural speed, becoming so large and beautiful that the local king had it cut down and fashioned into a pillar for his palace, unknowingly incorporating Osiris's corpse into the very structure of his hall. Isis traveled to Byblos, disguised herself, gained the queen's confidence, and eventually revealed her true identity and purpose. The horrified rulers of Byblos gave her the pillar immediately. She split it open, retrieved the sarcophagus, and brought her husband's body back to Egypt, hiding it in the papyrus marshes of the delta, while she prepared to work the greatest magic ever attempted, the reversal of death itself. But Set, hunting by moonlight in those same marshes, discovered the hidden sarcophagus. What happened next reveals the depth of Set's fear and fury. Recognizing what he'd found, perhaps terrified that Isis might actually succeed in reviving his murdered brother, Set committed an act that went far beyond simple murder. He tore Osiris's body apart, hacking the divine corpse into pieces and scattering them across Egypt. Here's where the story gets genuinely complicated, because even Egyptian sources disagree on fundamental details. The number of pieces varies wildly depending on which text you consult. 14 pieces according to Plutarch, and many later sources, perhaps representing half a lunar month. 16 pieces in other traditions, matching the ideal height, measured in cubits, of the Nile's annual flood. 42 pieces in still other accounts, corresponding to Egypt's 42 administrative districts or nomes. Some sources list as few as 12 pieces, others suggest as many as 26. These aren't just scribal errors or regional variations. Each number carried symbolic weight. 14 connected Osiris to lunar cycles and renewal. 16 tied him to the life-giving Nile flood. 42 made his scattered body parts map onto Egypt's geography itself, so that the entire kingdom became sacred through containing him. The variation suggests that different cult centers emphasized different aspects of the myth, each claiming to possess specific relics: his head at Abydos, a leg at another temple, an arm at a third shrine. What all versions agree on, however, is the purpose behind this dismemberment. Set wasn't just killing Osiris, he was attempting to make resurrection impossible by destroying the wholeness necessary for life. This was an attack on the fundamental principle of completeness, on the very possibility of restoration. If the body could never be made whole, if the pieces were scattered widely enough, then even Isis's formidable magic would fail. Set catastrophically underestimated her. Isis, aided by her sister Nephthys, who remained loyal despite being Set's own wife, suggesting complex family dynamics. The myth's only hint at began searching every corner of Egypt. Following clues, pursuing rumors, investigating whispers, Isis traveled to each nome, seeking her husband's scattered remains. The tradition developed that wherever she found a piece of Osiris, she performed burial rites or, in some tellings, erected a shrine or temple. This explained a peculiar feature of Egyptian religion. Numerous cities claimed to possess Osiris's tomb or to be his actual burial place. Rather than contradicting each other, these claims could all be true. Each city held a piece of him, making the entire land sacred through his distributed presence. The search concluded with both success and haunting failure. Isis recovered every piece of her husband's body save one: his phallus. According to the tradition, it had been thrown into the Nile where fish, specifically the Oxyrhynchus, Lepidotus, and Phaedrus, devoured it. This detail, which might seem like mere mythological embellishment, had profound religious consequences. These 3 fish species became forbidden food throughout Egypt, their consumption taboo because they had eaten divine flesh. The Nile itself, having absorbed Osiris's generative power, became sacred in a new way, its waters now carrying the god's fertility, perhaps explaining why those who drowned in the river were considered blessed. But how could Isis revive Osiris if his body remained incomplete? Here, the tradition records an astonishing act of craftsmanship and magic. Isis fashioned an artificial phallus from gold, or in some accounts from clay or wood, completing her husband's form through artistry and divine will. This wasn't mere replacement, it was a magical substitute imbued with the power of the original, demonstrating that the right ritual combined with the right intent could overcome even the permanent loss of divine essence. With Osiris's body finally whole, or whole enough, Isis prepared to perform humanity's first mummification. Working alongside Anubis, the jackal-headed god of embalming, who was himself, in a complex subplot, the son of Osiris by Nephthys, born from a case of mistaken identity that the myths mention but don't fully explain. Isis wrapped her husband in linen bandages. She anointed the body with precious oils and unguents. She spoke the spells that would preserve the flesh and bind the soul to its mortal form. Through these actions, she invented the very process that would sustain Egyptian civilization for thousands of years, making death not an ending, but a doorway. Yet preservation alone wasn't enough for Isis's purpose. She needed Osiris alive, at least momentarily, at least long enough to conceive an heir who could avenge his father and restore justice to Egypt's throne. Through magic that pushed the boundaries of what even gods thought possible, Isis briefly revived her husband's mummified form. The ancient Egyptian texts themselves are curiously discreet about exactly how this conception occurred, speaking in metaphor and allusion rather than explicit description. This reticence likely reflects the sacred nature of what was being described. Some depictions show Isis transformed into a kite or falcon, hovering over Osiris's preserved body, beating her wings to create the breath of life, magically drawing his seed into herself. Other images suggest more human coupling, with Isis using magical power to animate Osiris's corpse just long enough for their union. A few texts imply the conception involved Isis's magical invocation alone, the divine child forming from her will and Osiris's essence without physical union. What we can infer from these varying accounts is that the Egyptians understood the conception of Horus as fundamentally miraculous, impossible by natural means, achievable only through the most powerful magic, a triumph of love and determination over death itself. Isis had accomplished what should not be possible. She drew new life from a murdered corpse, ensuring that Osiris's bloodline would continue and justice would eventually be restored. But Osiris could not remain in the world of the living. Having passed through death, having been dismembered and mummified, he belonged now to the realm of the dead. He descended into the Duat to become its ruler, the king of the underworld, the judge before whom all souls would appear to be weighed and evaluated. His transformation was complete. From living king to murdered victim to revived mummy to lord of the dead. Osiris embodied the journey every Egyptian hoped to make, proving that death was not an ending, but a transition to a new form of existence. Isis, pregnant with Horus, fled into the marshes of the delta to hide from Set, who would surely kill the unborn child if he learned of its existence. In the papyrus swamps, surrounded by reeds and water, protected by minor gods and magical spells, Isis gave birth to the child who would one day restore his father's throne. The infant Horus was vulnerable, and many stories describe Isis's desperate efforts to protect him from serpents, scorpions, diseases, and Set's attempts to discover and destroy him. The Osiris myth established several fundamental concepts that would structure Egyptian religious thought for thousands of years. First, It demonstrated that even gods could die, but that death was not final. Resurrection was possible through proper magical religious practice, through the correct rituals, through the help of loving, powerful women like Isis. Second, it established the pattern of succession, the son avenging the murdered father, the young god replacing the old, but never quite erasing what came before. Third, it revealed that justice might be delayed, but would ultimately triumph, that usurpation and violence would be answered, and cosmic order restored. Every pharaoh who ruled Egypt identified himself with this mythological pattern. In life, he was Horus, the rightful heir ruling on earth. At death, he became Osiris, continuing to rule in the realm of the dead. His successor became the new Horus, starting the cycle again. This was not mere metaphor or religious symbolism. The Egyptians believed this literally. The pharaoh was a god incarnate, participating in divine nature, acting out the eternal patterns established by the gods themselves. For ordinary Egyptians, the Osiris myth offered hope that they too might share in resurrection. In early dynasties, only the pharaoh could become Osiris in death. But gradually, the Osiris cult democratized. By the Middle Kingdom, every Egyptian could hope to be Osiris, name, to undergo the same journey, to be judged and found worthy, to enter the field of reeds, where they would live eternally in a perfected version of Egypt, reunited with lost loved ones, free from pain and death. The myth also explained the agricultural cycle that sustained Egypt. Osiris was not only king of the dead, but god of vegetation, fertility, the life force that emerged from earth. His death and resurrection mirrored the annual cycle of the Nile, the flood coming, covering the land, then receding to reveal fertile soil where crops would grow. When grain sprouted from earth, it was Osiris rising again. When crops were harvested, it was Osiris being cut down, only to rise again in the next planting. Death and life were intertwined, inseparable, each necessary for the other. But the story was not complete. Osiris ruled the dead, yes, and Isis had borne his heir, but Set still held Egypt's throne through murder and violence. The child Horus was vulnerable, hidden, waiting to grow strong enough to challenge his uncle. The cosmic order had been violated, and until justice was restored, until Horus defeated Set and claimed his rightful inheritance, Mayat remained disrupted. The greatest battle in Egyptian mythology was yet to come. Horus and the battle for Egypt. Hidden in the marshes of the Delta, young Horus grew under his mother's fierce protection. Isis taught him wisdom, magic, and the truth of his heritage, that his father was the righteous king Osiris, murdered by Set, and that he, Horus, was the rightful heir to Egypt's throne. But Set ruled through force and fear, and Horus would need more than birthright to claim what was his by right. He would need strength, cunning, allies, and the willingness to fight for justice against overwhelming odds. The texts preserve many stories of Horus's childhood, when Isis protected him from dangers both natural and supernatural. Scorpions that came to sting the infant prince were stopped by Isis's magic. Serpents that slithered into his hiding place were turned away by her spells. Disease that threatened the child was healed by her power. In one particularly vivid account, Horus was bitten by a scorpion and fell deathly ill. Isis's magic was insufficient to save him, so she called out to Ra himself, stopping the sun's journey across the sky until the great god sent his son Thoth, god of wisdom and magic, to heal the child. These stories served dual purposes. They demonstrated Isis's devotion and power as a mother, establishing her as the ideal of maternal protection. But they also showed that even the divine child, the rightful heir, the future king, was vulnerable and needed help to survive. This was crucial for Egyptian theology. It meant humans could relate to the gods' struggles, could see themselves in these cosmic stories, could believe that their own prayers and magic might be effective, since even gods needed such things. As Horus matured, the time came for him to challenge Set for the throne. The accounts of this confrontation, preserved primarily in a text known as The Contendings of Horus and Set, describe not a single battle, but a series of contests, trials, and legal proceedings before the divine tribunal. Justice would not be achieved through simple violence, but through a complex process of challenge, counter-challenge, argument, and divine judgment. The tribunal was presided over by various gods depending on the telling, sometimes Geb, the father of both Osiris and Set, sometimes Ra or Atum, the supreme creators, sometimes the Ennead collectively. Thoth served as counselor and mediator, trying to find peaceful resolution. Other gods took sides. Most favored Horus as the legitimate heir, but some worried about the precedent of replacing a strong king like Set with a young, untested claimant. The contests between Horus and Set took various forms. In one, they transformed into hippopotami to see who could hold their breath underwater longest, a test of strength and endurance. In another, they raced boats, but Set's boat was made of stone and sank immediately, while Horus's boat, cunningly crafted to look like stone but actually wood covered with plaster, floated successfully. Through such trials, Horus demonstrated not just strength but cleverness, showing he possessed the qualities needed to rule. But the contendings were not merely physical contests. They involved legal arguments about the nature of kingship and succession. Set argued that power should go to the strongest, that he had taken the throne by force and should keep it through force. Horus countered that Ma'at demanded the rightful heir inherit from his father, that justice and proper order were more important than mere strength. The gods debated these positions, recognizing merit in both arguments. Some versions include a striking moment where the tribunal wrote to Osiris in the underworld, asking for his opinion. The god of the dead responded forcefully. "His son must inherit the throne," he said, "for no one who took the throne through murder should be allowed to keep it." Furthermore, Osiris pointed out, he controlled the emissaries who brought grain from the afterlife to the living world. If the gods did not rule justly, he could withhold the harvest, bringing famine to both divine and mortal realms. This threat, combining legal argument with practical power, carried significant weight. The physical battles between Horus and Set grew violent. In one encounter, Set tore out one of Horus's eyes, while Horus castrated Set. The eye of Horus, reassembled and healed by Thoth, became one of the most powerful symbols in Egyptian religion, the Wadjet eye representing wholeness, healing, and protection. Amulets in the shape of the eye of Horus were worn by living and dead alike, believed to offer divine protection and restoration of what was lost or broken. Eventually, after 80 years of contendings according to one account, the tribunal reached its verdict. Horus was the rightful king. Set was defeated not just in battle, but in legal judgment before the gods themselves. This established a crucial principle. Power alone was not sufficient for legitimate rule. The pharaoh's authority came not from mere strength, but from being the rightful heir, from maintaining Ma'at, from divine approval confirmed through proper legal and religious processes. But the story contains a troubling moment that reveals the complexity of Egyptian mythology. After Set's defeat, when Horus had triumphed completely, Isis felt pity for her brother Set. Using her magical words, she released him from captivity or punishment. Horus was enraged that his mother would show mercy to his father's murderer and Set's own crimes. In his fury, he attacked Isis herself, cutting off her head in some versions. This shocking violence, a son striking his mother, the rightful king attacking the goddess who had birthed and protected him, demonstrated that even justified rage could lead to injustice. Thoth or Ra restored Isis, replacing her severed head with that of a cow, explaining why Isis was sometimes depicted with cow horns. Horus was punished or chastised for his crime, teaching that anger, however justified its source, must be controlled by Ma'at. Finally reconciled, judgment confirmed, Horus took his place as king of the living, while Osiris ruled the dead. Set's fate varied in different traditions. Some said he was banished to the desert, where he became god of foreign lands and chaos, still powerful but outside civilized order. Others had him serve Ra's bark eternally, using his violent nature to protect the sun god from Apophis. Still others suggested he was executed, though as a god, such death might not be permanent. The resolution of the Horus-Set conflict established the pattern of divine kingship that would govern Egypt for 3 millennia. The pharaoh was the living Horus, embodying the young god-king who had rightfully claimed his inheritance. When the pharaoh died, he became Osiris, ruler of the underworld, while his son became the new Horus. This cycle repeated endlessly, each succession reenacting the primordial myth, each coronation restoring Ma'at after the disruption of a king's death. The myth also established deep symbolic meanings that resonated through Egyptian culture. Horus represented divine kingship, legitimate succession, the restoration of justice. Set embodied chaos, usurpation, violence. Necessary forces, perhaps, but forces that must be defeated and controlled. Isis demonstrated that magical knowledge, maternal love, and faithful devotion could restore what violence had destroyed. Osiris proved that death was not an ending, but a transformation, that the righteous dead would be vindicated. For the living Egyptian, this myth provided a framework for understanding both politics and personal life. When their pharaoh ruled justly, it was Horus maintaining Ma'at. When there was conflict over succession, it was the Horus-Set struggle replayed. When they died and sought entry to the afterlife, they hoped to be like Osiris, justified before the divine tribunal, found worthy to enter paradise. But how exactly did that judgment work? What happened when an Egyptian died, when their soul left the body to begin the perilous journey through the underworld? The answer lay in one of the most important collections of texts ever composed, known to modern scholars as the Book of the Dead, but called by the ancient Egyptians something quite different, the Book of Coming Forth by Day. The Book of the Dead, Journey to the Afterlife. Death in ancient Egypt was not an ending, but a dangerous transition, the beginning of a journey that would determine one's eternal fate. The Ka, Ba, Ach, and other aspects of the self that comprised a human being needed guidance, protection, and magical assistance to navigate the perils of the Duat and stand successfully before Osiris in the Hall of Judgment. But here's a surprising truth that changes how we understand Egyptian religion. The famous Book of the Dead that tourists see illustrated on papyrus in museums wasn't ancient at all, at least not by Egyptian standards. What we call the Book of the Dead only emerged around 1550 BCE during Egypt's New Kingdom. By that point, Egyptian civilization had already been building pyramids and worshipping these same gods for over 1,000 years. So what did earlier Egyptians use for funerary guidance? The answer reveals a fascinating evolution of democratization in Egyptian religion. The oldest funerary texts, dating back to around 2400–2300 BCE, were the pyramid texts. Intricate spells and incantations carved into the subterranean chambers of Old Kingdom pyramids. These were the exclusive privilege of pharaohs, reserved for divinity incarnate alone. No nobleman, no matter how wealthy or powerful, could access these sacred formulas for navigating the afterlife. Then came the first intermediate period, when Egypt's central authority collapsed and regional governors gained power. Suddenly, around 2100 BCE, a new set of texts appeared. The coffin texts. These were funerary spells painted on the wooden coffins of nobility and wealthy commoners. Basically, the pyramid text adapted for non-royal use, with additions, modifications, and new spells addressing concerns that pharaohs presumably didn't worry about. This was the democratization of the afterlife, the revolutionary idea that eternal life wasn't reserved for god kings, but available to anyone who could afford the proper burial. The Book of the Dead represented the culmination of this process. By the New Kingdom, funerary texts had become widely available, written on papyrus scrolls that could be mass-produced and sold at varying quality and price points. The spells were no longer secret knowledge, whispered in royal pyramid chambers, but consumer goods available in temple workshops. You could commission a personalized copy with your name inserted into the spells, or buy a cheaper pre-made version with blanks to fill in. What makes this evolution remarkable is what it suggests about Egyptian society's changing relationship with the afterlife and with the gods. Over 1,500 years, eternity transformed from an exclusive royal privilege to a universal hope, not through revolution or religious reform, but through gradual cultural change, driven partly by economic factors, partly by evolving theology that recognized divine justice couldn't be reserved for the powerful alone. The Book of the Dead itself was not a single canonical text like a modern religious scripture. It was a collection of approximately 190 spells, prayers, hymns, and instructions. Sources vary from 180 to 200 distinct spells that could be selected, arranged, and personalized according to the deceased's preferences and ability to pay. Wealthy individuals commissioned elaborate papyrus copies with beautiful illustrations and extensive texts. Middle-class Egyptians might purchase shorter versions with fewer spells. The very poor might have only a few key passages inscribed on their coffin or on amulets buried with them. But every version served the same purpose: to help the deceased navigate the treacherous journey through the afterlife and emerge successfully into paradise. The title the Egyptians gave this collection, Book of Coming Forth by Day, reveals their understanding that the goal was not to remain in death, but to be reborn into light, to emerge from the darkness of the tomb and the underworld into eternal daylight, joining Ra in his daily journey, or residing in the Field of Reeds, a perfected Egypt where the blessed dead lived forever. The journey began at the moment of death, when the various aspects of the person separated. The ka, often translated as life force or vital essence, remained near the body in the tomb, sustained by offerings of food and drink left by the living. The ba, sometimes rendered as personality or soul, took the form of a human-headed bird that could move freely between the tomb and the afterlife, visiting the deceased's favorite places, receiving sustenance from the offering formulas. The ach, which might be understood as transfigured spirit, was what the deceased became if they successfully passed through death and judgment, a glorified, immortal being who had joined the company of the gods. Other aspects included the shadow, the name, which had to be preserved because to be forgotten was to die a second permanent death, and the heart, the ibi, which was the seat of thought, memory, emotion, and will. The heart was crucial because it would be weighed in judgment. The Egyptians believed the heart recorded every deed, thought, and word of a person's life. It was not removed during mummification, but left in place or, if accidentally removed, replaced. Heart scarabs carved with specific spells were placed over the chest to prevent the heart from betraying its owner during the weighing. The journey through the Duat presented numerous challenges. The deceased had to navigate through 12 gates, each guarded by fierce deities with knives, serpents, and hostile powers. To pass each gate, one needed to know the name of its guardian. Not the common name, but the secret, true name that held power. The Book of the Dead provided these names: inverted of face, numerous of forms, swallower of sinners who comes forth from the cave, terrible of face who repels the crocodile. The deceased also faced demons, serpents, and hostile spirits who sought to prevent souls from reaching judgment or to destroy them outright. Protection spells were essential. I am the outflow which issued from Osiris. I am not seized, I am not restrained. I have power over my body. I have power over my arms. No injury is done to my body. No harm comes near me. There were rivers of fire to cross, monsters to avoid, regions of absolute darkness where even the gods could not see. The deceased needed spells to transform into various forms. A phoenix to fly over obstacles, a lotus flower to rise from the waters, a powerful god to intimidate demons. The Book of the Dead provided instructions for these transformations. I am the lotus, pure one who comes forth from the field of Ra. I have made my transformation like the god who eats his father. But all these dangers were preliminary to the ultimate challenge, the weighing of the heart in the Hall of Two Truths. This was the moment when the deceased's entire life would be evaluated, when their worthiness to enter the afterlife would be determined. The scene was depicted on countless papyri, tomb walls, and funerary objects, becoming one of the most iconic images of Egyptian religion. The hall was populated with divine judges. Osiris sat on his throne, mummiform and regal, holding the crook and flail of kingship. Behind him stood Isis and Nephthys, the faithful sisters who had restored him from death. Before him were the 42 assessors of Ma'at, divine judges each associated with a particular nome of Egypt and responsible for evaluating specific sins or virtues. The deceased stood before this tribunal and recited the negative confession, 42 declarations of innocence, one for each judge. I have not committed evil against men. I have not mistreated cattle. I have not committed sin in the place of truth. I have not blasphemed a god. I have not done violence to a poor man. I have not made anyone suffer. I have not made anyone weep. I have not killed. I have not given order to kill. I have not caused anyone pain. The list continued, covering a comprehensive range of ethical behaviors. Not stealing, not lying, not cheating in measurements, not damming water belonging to others, not disrupting the proper order of things. This negative confession reveals what the Egyptians considered ethically important, not just avoiding obvious crimes like murder and theft, but maintaining proper social relationships, respecting property, treating animals well, following honest practices in business, and upholding Ma'at in all interactions. But words alone were insufficient. The heart itself must testify. The god Anubis, jackal-headed guardian of the dead, tended the great scales. On one pan he placed the heart of the deceased. On the other pan sat the feather of Ma'at, light and delicate, representing truth, justice, and proper order. The god Thoth, ibis-headed master of writing and wisdom, stood ready with his palette and brush to record the result. If the heart, burdened with sins and injustice, weighed more than the feather, the deceased failed the test. Their heart would fall into the jaws of Ammit, the devourer, a composite monster with the head of a crocodile, the forequarters of a lion, and the hindquarters of a hippopotamus. Amit would consume the heart, and the soul would face the second death. Complete obliteration, cessation of existence, eternal darkness with no hope of resurrection. This was the fate the Egyptians feared most. Not physical death, but the death of the soul itself. But if the heart balanced perfectly with the feather, if it was as light as truth itself, the deceased was declared Ma Keru, true of voice, justified, vindicated. Thoth recorded this verdict. Osiris welcomed the soul as one of the blessed dead, granting entry to the field of reeds, the paradise where the justified would dwell eternally. The field of reeds, called Aru or Seket Aru, was envisioned as a perfected version of Egypt. There were canals and waterways like the Nile, fields of wheat and barley growing abundantly, gardens and orchards laden with fruit. The deceased would have a plot of land to cultivate, but the work would be easy, the harvest always bountiful. Shabti figures, small servant statues buried with the deceased, would come to life to perform the labor, answering when the dead person was called to work. Here I am. I shall do it. In the field of reeds, the blessed dead reunited with deceased loved ones, were reunited with beloved pets, enjoyed favorite foods, engaged in favorite activities. They could return to visit the living world, travel with Ra in his solar bark, or remain in their paradisical estate. Death had been transformed into eternal life, but life enhanced, perfected, freed from pain, disease, and the fear of losing what one cherished. The judgment scene and the concept of the afterlife that it represented reveal profound aspects of Egyptian moral and religious thought. First, they show that the Egyptians believed in divine justice, that one's deeds mattered, that the wicked would be punished and the righteous rewarded. This was not a society that believed in arbitrary salvation or that wealth and power in life guaranteed comfort in death. Second, the negative confession reveals an ethical system focused on social harmony and proper behavior rather than abstract theological beliefs. What mattered was how you treated others, humans, animals, the divine order itself. The content of belief was less important than the practice of virtue. Third, the weighing of the heart against the feather shows that the Egyptians understood a profound truth. Justice must be balanced, precise, even delicate. The feather is light, easily disturbed, yet it represents the weightiest things: truth, proper order, cosmic justice. To match the feather, one's heart must be free from the heavy burdens of guilt, injustice, cruelty. There's an interesting tension in the Book of the Dead between moral earnestness and magical pragmatism. The negative confession suggests that only the truly virtuous would pass judgment. But spell 30b, meant to be inscribed on the heart scarab, specifically asks the heart not to testify against its owner. O my heart of my mother, do not stand up as a witness against me. Do not be opposed to me in the tribunal. Do not be hostile to me in the presence of the keeper of the balance. This suggests a recognition that humans were fallible, that everyone had committed some wrong, and that magical protection might be necessary to pass judgment even for generally good people. Scholars have debated how seriously the Egyptians took the moral content of the Book of the Dead. Some argue it was essentially magical, that knowing the right spells and having the correct amulets was more important than actual virtue. Others contend that the ethical content was genuine, that the Egyptians truly believed divine judgment would evaluate moral character. The truth likely lies somewhere between. The Egyptians believed both that morality mattered and that ritual and magic were necessary, that these aspects of religion weren't contradictory but complementary. The Book of the Dead, the journey through the Duat, the weighing of the heart, All of this shaped how Egyptians lived their lives. They made offerings to the dead to sustain the Ka. They commissioned tomb inscriptions and funerary equipment to protect the deceased. They lived ethically, so their hearts would be light at judgment. Death was always present in Egyptian consciousness, but it wasn't feared as oblivion. It was prepared for as a transition that, with proper preparation and divine favor, could lead to eternal paradise. But the judgment hall, the field of reeds, the eternal life offered to the justified dead, none of this would be possible without the gods who made it so. Osiris judged the dead because he himself had died and been resurrected. Anubis tended the scales because he was master of embalming. Thoth recorded the verdict because he was the divine scribe. Ma'at's feather served as the standard because she personified cosmic order. The afterlife that Egyptians envisioned was populated not just by the blessed dead, but by numerous deities, each with specific roles, powers, and domains that extended far beyond the judgment hall. The pantheon expands, gods of every aspect. As Egyptian civilization grew more complex, so did its divine population. Beyond the Ennead, beyond Ra and Osiris and the major gods of creation and kingship, the Egyptians recognized hundreds of deities, each governing specific aspects of existence, each receiving worship in particular regions, each merging and separating and evolving across the millennia. To understand Egyptian religion, we must meet at least some of these divine personalities who shaped daily life, answered prayers, protected the vulnerable, and sometimes wreaked terrible vengeance on those who offended them. Thoth, the ibis-headed god of wisdom, writing, and magic, played crucial roles throughout Egyptian mythology. He invented hieroglyphics, that sacred script that was called Words of the Gods. He served as Ra's scribe and counselor, recording the sun god's decrees. He mediated disputes among the gods, using wisdom and eloquence to find peaceful solutions. In the Osiris myth, Thoth healed Horus's eye and Isis's severed head, demonstrating his mastery of magical medicine. He recorded the verdict at the weighing of the heart, his careful notation determining eternal fates. Thoth represented intellectual power as opposed to physical might or magical compulsion. His cult center was Hermopolis, where he was said to have created the world through sacred speech, bringing reality into being by pronouncing the correct words. Scribes, scholars, and magicians all looked to Thoth as their patron, praying for wisdom, clear thought, eloquence, and the ability to master Egypt's complex written system. The Greeks later identified Thoth with Hermes, giving rise to the syncretic deity Hermes Trismegistus and the philosophical tradition of Hermeticism. Anubis, with his distinctive jackal head, presided over mummification, embalming, and the protection of the dead. Why a jackal? Because jackals were seen scavenging in cemeteries, and the Egyptians transformed this threat into a protector, the god who guarded the dead rather than desecrating them. Anubis supervised the mummification process, ensuring bodies were properly preserved for eternal life. He guided souls through the underworld, protected tombs from robbers, and tended the scales during judgment. In the Osiris myth, Anubis performed the first mummification, wrapping Osiris in bandages, applying the necessary oils and unguents, performing the opening of the mouth ceremony that allowed the deceased to breathe, eat, and speak in the afterlife. Every embalmer who performed mummification did so as Anubis's representative, wearing the jackal mask, speaking the same spells, reenacting that first divine embalming. The dead were called one who is under the protection of Anubis, and his image adorned countless tombs, coffins, and funerary objects. Hathor, the cow goddess of love, beauty, music, and joy, represented the gentler aspects of female divinity. She was the golden one, often depicted with a sun disk between cow horns, her form merging feminine beauty with bovine fertility and nurturing power. Hathor presided over music and dance, sexuality and childbirth, drunkenness and celebration. Her festivals were joyous occasions involving alcohol, music, and abandon, permission to indulge in pleasures that Ma'at usually required humans to moderate. But Hathor had another aspect. She could become Sekhmet, the lioness goddess of war and plague. In one myth, Ra sent his eye to punish rebellious humanity, and it took the form of Sekhmet, who began slaughtering humans with such ferocity that Ra himself feared she would exterminate the human race. To stop her, the gods prepared beer dyed red to look like blood and flooded the fields with it. Sekhmet, thinking it was blood, drank until she became so intoxicated she forgot about killing and transformed back into gentle Hathor. This dual nature, Hathor the joyous and Sekhmet the violent, reflected Egyptian understanding that the same forces could manifest destructively or constructively depending on circumstances. The female divine could nurture or destroy, love or kill. Goddesses were not weak or passive, but possessed tremendous power that must be properly channeled and appeased. Bastet, another goddess with feline aspects, protected homes, women, children, and cats. Originally depicted as a lioness, she gradually became associated with domestic cats, those beloved creatures the Egyptians revered and even mummified. Bastet was a protector goddess, gentler than Sekhmet, but still fierce when defending her charges. Her cult center at Bubastis hosted enormous festivals where hundreds of thousands of worshippers gathered to celebrate with music, dancing, and wine. Ma'at deserves special attention because she represented a concept as much as a personality. The daughter of Ra, depicted as a woman wearing an ostrich feather on her head, Ma'at personified truth, justice, cosmic order, and proper balance. She was simultaneously an abstract principle and a goddess who could be invoked, depicted, and worshipped. The pharaoh's primary duty was to uphold Ma'at, to rule justly, maintain cosmic order, perform the rituals that kept the gods satisfied, and the universe functioning. Ma'at's opposite was Isfet, chaos, disorder, injustice, everything that threatened cosmic order. Every action could be evaluated as either reinforcing Ma'at or increasing Isfet. Speaking truth upheld Ma'at. Lying spread Isfet. Fair trade, honest measurements, proper offerings, just verdicts, all strengthened Ma'at. Cheating, violence, impiety, disruption weakened it. At the end of each day, the pharaoh was supposed to offer a small figurine of Ma'at to the gods, symbolically presenting proof that order had been maintained. Ptah, patron of Memphis and one of the creator gods, was god of craftsmen, artists and architects. He created through intellectual conception and verbal command, bringing reality into being through thought and speech. Workers in stone, metal, wood, and cloth all honored Ptah, seeking his blessing for their work. The beautiful objects found in Egyptian tombs, the magnificent temples and pyramids, the precise hieroglyphics carved in stone, all were created under Ptah's patronage. These major gods had countless smaller deities accompanying them, local gods associated with specific cities or regions, household gods who protected families, gods of particular crafts or activities. Bes, a dwarf god with a lion-like face and tongue stuck out comically, protected children and women in childbirth, warding off evil spirits through his frightening appearance. Taweret, a pregnant hippopotamus standing upright, also protected pregnancy and childbirth. Khepri, the scarab beetle god, represented transformation and the dawn sun. Sobek, the crocodile god, was fierce and dangerous, but also associated with the Nile's fertility. Different regions emphasized different gods. Memphis primarily worshipped Ptah. Thebes elevated Amun to supreme position during the New Kingdom. Heliopolis remained devoted to Ra. Local variations in mythology and practice created a complex, sometimes contradictory religious landscape, where different traditions coexisted, merged, or competed depending on political circumstances. This brings us to one of Egyptian religion's most characteristic features: syncretism, the merging of gods into composite deities. We've already encountered examples. Amun-Ra combined Thebes' hidden god with Heliopolis' un-god, creating a supreme deity who was both transcendent and immanent, hidden and revealed. Ra-Horakhti merged the sun god with Horus, connecting solar worship with kingship. Ptah-Seker Osiris combined Memphis' creator god with Sokar, an underworld deity, and Osiris, creating a complex deity associated with both creation and the realm of the dead. These weren't simply different gods with similar attributes being equated. The Egyptians genuinely believed these were revelations of deeper truths, that what seemed like separate gods were actually different aspects or manifestations of the same divine power, or that gods could merge temporarily for specific purposes, their distinct identities maintained, while their powers combined. This theological flexibility would prove crucial when Egypt encountered foreign peoples with their own gods. The Egyptian pantheon was not static, but evolved continuously across 3,000 years. New gods emerged, often locally at first, before spreading more widely. Foreign gods were incorporated. The Canaanite goddesses Anat and Astarte were adopted into Egyptian worship during the New Kingdom. Political changes elevated certain gods. Amun rose with Thebes' power, while Ra remained important because Heliopolis' theological influence persisted across dynasties. What unified this diverse pantheon was the understanding that all gods, however different, served to maintain Ma'at, to uphold cosmic order, to ensure the world continued functioning properly. And at the apex of this divine hierarchy stood not just the gods themselves, but their earthly representative, the living god-king, the pharaoh who bridged divine and human realms, ensuring Ma'at prevailed on earth as it did in heaven. Divine kingship. Pharaohs as living gods. The pharaoh was not merely a king who ruled by divine right or claimed descent from the gods. In Egyptian understanding, the pharaoh was literally, physically divine, a god incarnate, walking the earth in human form, the living embodiment of cosmic order. This concept of divine kingship was so fundamental to Egyptian civilization that it shaped politics, religion, architecture, art, and every aspect of life along the Nile for over 3 millennia. Every pharaoh who ascended the throne became the living Horus. This wasn't metaphorical or honorary, but essential to the role. The king was Horus, son of Osiris, rightful heir who had defeated Set and claimed his legitimate throne. When the pharaoh wore the double crown, the white crown of Upper Egypt combined with the red crown of Lower Egypt, he wore the divine symbol of Horus's unification of the two lands. When he held the crook and flail, he held Osiris's symbols of authority. When he appeared in public wearing the false beard and the Uraeus serpent on his brow, he displayed the markers of divinity. At death, the transformation was complete and explicit. The dead pharaoh became Osiris, ruler of the underworld, while his successor became the new Horus. The funeral rituals reenacted the Osiris myth, with the deceased king's body mummified as Osiris's had been, his tomb decorated with texts and images to facilitate his journey through the Duat, his burial accompanied by ceremonies that ensured his resurrection in the realm of the dead. But the pharaoh's divinity was not passive or ceremonial. It came with specific, crucial responsibilities. The king's primary duty was to uphold Ma'at, to maintain cosmic order through ritual action and just governance. This meant performing daily rituals in the temples, though in practice these were delegated to priests who acted as the king's representatives. Theoretically, only the pharaoh could approach the gods' statues, make offerings, speak the necessary prayers. Every temple wall showed the king making offerings, even though most pharaohs visited most temples only rarely, if at all. The rituals were not symbolic, but effective. They actually accomplished things in the divine realm. When the pharaoh made offerings to the gods, he fed them, sustaining their power. When he performed the correct rites, he ensured the Nile would flood at the proper time, crops would grow, Egypt would be protected from foreign invasion, chaos would be held at bay. The king's ritual competence was as important as his military or political skill. Perhaps more so, because if he failed in his divine duties, the gods might withdraw their favor, and Egypt would suffer. Ma'at was not simply justice in the legal sense, but cosmic order itself. The pharaoh upheld Ma'at through many actions, maintaining temples and priestly establishments, ensuring fair administration of justice, defending Egypt's borders, conducting successful military campaigns against chaos representing foreigners, undertaking building projects that glorified the gods, and living according to proper standards of behavior. This last point is crucial. The pharaoh was expected to embody Ma'at in his personal conduct. Kings who were remembered as good rulers were described as having done Ma'at for the gods and for the people. Bad rulers were said to have neglected Ma'at, allowed Isfet to increase. The great instruction texts that advised princes on proper conduct emphasized that even the divine king must adhere to justice, truth, and proper order. The pharaoh also served as the primary intermediary between the divine and human realms. He was not quite human, having divine nature, but not quite a god like Ra or Osiris, being mortal and embodied. He existed in between, able to interact with both realms, translating divine will into earthly action and human needs into divine language. When Egyptians wanted the gods' favor, they often petitioned the pharaoh, who would then intercede with the gods on their behalf. This divine kingship was visually communicated through art and architecture. The colossal statues of pharaohs that still awe modern visitors were not mere ego monuments, though pride certainly played a role, but theological statements. The king's enormous size relative to other humans in reliefs and paintings showed his divine status. The perfect idealized representation of the pharaoh's body, eternally youthful, strong, beautiful, reflected his divine nature. Even elderly or ill pharaohs were depicted as young and vigorous because the image showed their divine essence, not their temporary mortal condition. The pyramids and great temples similarly expressed divine kingship. Pyramids were not tombs first and foremost. They were machines for transformation, designed to facilitate the dead king's ascension to the stars, his joining with Ra and Osiris. The pyramid's shape might represent the primordial mound or the rays of the sun reaching down to earth, connecting heaven and earth as the king himself connected divine and human. Temple architecture created sacred space where the divine was most present. Moving from the public outer courts through columned halls toward the dark sanctuary where the god's statue resided, one moved from the mundane toward the sacred, from human space toward divine realm. Only the pharaoh or his priestly representatives could enter the innermost shrine, because only those with divine nature could approach the gods directly. Foreign visitors to Egypt often misunderstood or were scandalized by divine kingship. The Greeks and Romans who later ruled Egypt tried to maintain the fiction of pharaonic divinity when dealing with native Egyptians, while treating it as absurd superstition among themselves. But to the Egyptians, this was no fiction. The pharaoh genuinely was a god, as real in his divinity as Ra or Horus, and the fate of Egypt and the cosmos depended on his proper fulfillment of that divine role. Yet there were limits. The king was a junior god, below the great deities in the hierarchy. He required their favor and support. If he neglected the gods, failed to maintain Ma'at, ruled unjustly or incompetently, the gods might withdraw their blessing. Egypt might suffer invasion, famine, disorder. In extreme cases, a pharaoh might be assassinated or overthrown, proof that even a living god could be removed if he failed in his divine responsibilities. This understanding shaped Egyptian political theology in profound ways. Successful conquest by foreign peoples posed theological problems. If the pharaoh was divine, how could foreigners defeat him? The answer: because Egypt had fallen into Isfet, the pharaoh had failed to maintain Ma'at. The gods had withdrawn support. But the solution was for the foreigners to adopt Egyptian divine kingship themselves, to become pharaohs, to take on that divine role, to restore Ma'at. This is why foreign rulers from Nubians to Persians to Macedonian Greeks to Romans all took on pharaonic titles and attempted to fulfill pharaonic duties when ruling Egypt. The most dramatic challenge to this entire system came not from foreign conquest, but from within, when one pharaoh attempted to overthrow 3,000 years of tradition and establish a radically different religious order, elevating a single deity above all others, and in the process, nearly destroying Egyptian civilization itself. The Amarna Revolution, Akhenaten's monotheism. Around 1353 BCE, a pharaoh ascended Egypt's throne who would attempt the most radical religious transformation in ancient history. His name at birth was Amenhotep IV. Amun is satisfied, connecting him to Amun-Ra, the supreme god of the New Kingdom pantheon. But this pharaoh would reject Amun, close his temples, erase his name from monuments, and elevate a relatively minor solar deity named the Aten to exclusive worship. He would change his own name to Akhenaten, effective spirit of the Aten, and attempt to reforge Egyptian religion entirely. The Aten was not a new god. Solar discs appeared in Egyptian iconography for millennia, representing the sun's physical presence. But Akhenaten went further, declaring that the Aten, specifically the physical solar disk, the light itself, was the sole god, the only deity worthy of worship. The other gods, if they existed at all, were irrelevant. Only the Aten mattered, and only the pharaoh could communicate directly with the Aten, making the king even more crucial as the sole intermediary between the divine and human realms. Why did Akhenaten do this? Scholars have debated for over a century, offering various theories. Perhaps it was genuine religious conviction, a monotheistic impulse that arose from deep theological reflection. Perhaps it was political, an attempt to break the power of Amun's priesthood, which had grown wealthy and influential enough to challenge royal authority. Perhaps it was both, or something else entirely, the expression of Akhenaten's own psychological or philosophical orientation, a radical artistic and cultural movement, or simply the megalomania of an absolute ruler. Whatever his motivations, Akhenaten pursued his religious revolution with fervor. He closed the traditional temples, or at least cut off their funding and royal support. He ordered his agents to chisel out Amun's name from monuments throughout Egypt, a significant task given how ubiquitous that name was. He moved the capital from Thebes, Amun's cult center, to a new city built on virgin desert land, Akhetaten, horizon of the Aten, modern Amarna. The move to Amarna was not just political or religious, but artistic. Atenist art broke dramatically with Egyptian conventions. Traditional art showed idealized, eternally youthful figures in formal, standardized poses. Atenist art depicted Akhenaten with an elongated skull, feminine hips, a protruding belly, spindly limbs, features that have puzzled historians. Was this how he actually looked, perhaps from genetic conditions? Or was it symbolic, representing some theological concept about the pharaoh containing both male and female divine principles? Images of Akhenaten with his wife Nefertiti and their daughters show unusual intimacy and naturalism for Egyptian royal art. We see the family eating together, Akhenaten kissing his children, Nefertiti sitting on her husband's lap. The rays of the Aten stream down, ending in hands that hold Ankh symbols to the royal family's noses, giving them the breath of life. The message was clear. The Aten sustained only the royal family directly. Everyone else received divine blessing through the king. The religious texts Akhenaten composed differ markedly from traditional Egyptian hymns. The great hymn to the Aten, possibly written by the king himself, praises the sun disk as creator of all things, giver of life, universal sustainer. It emphasizes the Aten's love for all creation, not just Egypt, but foreign lands as well. A surprisingly universalistic theology for ancient Egypt, which generally saw foreigners as chaos dwellers outside Ma'at's realm. But this revolution was deeply unpopular. The priesthoods of traditional gods lost income, status, power. Common Egyptians were told to abandon the household gods, local deities, and familiar religious practices that structured their lives. The workers who built Amarna smuggled traditional god figures into their tombs, showing their resistance. Without traditional temples and festivals, the social and economic networks that connected Egyptians weakened. Worship became more centralized, more dependent on the pharaoh, less accessible to ordinary people. Akhenaten's reign lasted only about 17 years. When he died, the reaction was swift. His son and successor, initially Tutankhaten, living image of the Aten, changed his name to Tutankhamun, living image of Amun, signaling the restoration of traditional religion. The boy king's advisors, likely including the general Horemheb and the vizier Ai, orchestrated the return to orthodox practices. Temples to Amun and other gods reopened. The priesthoods were refunded and reconstituted. The court moved back to Thebes. Amarna was eventually abandoned, its buildings dismantled for stone. Akhenaten's name was erased from king lists. He became the criminal of Akhetaten, the heretic pharaoh whose memory should be obliterated. His radical theology died with him, leaving barely a trace in subsequent Egyptian religion. Or did it? The Amarna period's influence on later thought remains debated. Some scholars argue it influenced developing Hebrew monotheism, pointing to similarities between the hymn to the Aten and Psalm 104. Others suggest it contributed to solar theology's continued importance in late Egyptian religion. Most likely, it was a failed experiment that confirmed Egyptian resistance to religious exclusivity. They preferred their fluid, syncretistic system where many gods could coexist, merge, and serve different needs. The Amarna episode reveals both Egyptian religion's resilience and its essential conservatism. After 3,000 years of tradition, Akhenaten thought he could remake everything in a single generation. He failed not because his theology lacked intellectual sophistication, but because Egyptian religion was so deeply woven into every aspect of life, political, economic, social, artistic, that altering it meant unraveling Egyptian civilization itself. The people chose tradition. Yet the question Akhenaten raised, whether there was one supreme god above or behind the many gods, would echo through later Egyptian history, especially as Egypt encountered peoples whose religious traditions differed markedly from their own. These encounters, whether through conquest or cultural exchange, would continue to shape Egyptian religion during its final centuries, as foreign gods entered the pantheon and Egyptian deities spread throughout the Mediterranean world. Foreign influences and cultural exchange. Egyptian religion never existed in isolation. Throughout its long history, Egypt interacted with neighboring peoples, Nubians to the south, Libyans to the west, various Near Eastern cultures to the northeast. These contacts brought foreign gods into Egypt and spread Egyptian deities abroad, creating a complex web of religious exchange that intensified during the first millennium BCE. The Nubians, who occasionally ruled Egypt during the 25th dynasty, brought their own religious traditions while adopting Egyptian gods. They particularly revered Amun, building magnificent temples at sites like Jebel Barkal. Nubian pharaohs presented themselves as more authentically Egyptian than the Egyptians themselves, claiming to restore traditional religion after periods of decline. Yet they also maintained distinctively Nubian practices, creating a hybrid culture that was both Egyptian and uniquely their own. Persian conquest in 525 BCE brought Egypt under the Achaemenid Empire. The Persians generally respected Egyptian religion, at least initially. Persian kings took pharaonic titles and made offerings to Egyptian gods, understanding that legitimacy in Egypt required accepting Egyptian religious forms. The Persian god Ahura Mazda and the Egyptian creator gods were sometimes equated, or at least seen as compatible. Yet Persian rule also sparked Egyptian resistance, partly religious in character, as some Egyptians saw foreign domination as a disruption of Ma'at. The most significant cultural exchange came with Alexander the Great's conquest in 332 BCE and the subsequent Ptolemaic kingdom, established by his general Ptolemy I. The Ptolemies were Macedonian Greeks who ruled Egypt for nearly 3 centuries, creating a unique Greco-Egyptian culture, especially in Alexandria, the new capital they built on the Mediterranean coast. The Ptolemies needed legitimacy in Egyptian eyes, so they presented themselves as pharaohs, built and restored temples in traditional Egyptian style, participated in Egyptian religious ceremonies, and supported the native priesthoods. Ptolemaic queens sometimes took the title Daughter of Ra, or identified themselves with Isis. The Ptolemies issued decrees in both Greek and Egyptian, carved on stones like the famous Rosetta Stone, showing respect for both linguistic communities. But the Ptolemies also introduced Greek culture, language, and religion. Alexandria became a center of Greek learning, home to the famous library and museum. Greek settlers worshipped Greek gods in Greek-style temples. The Greek and Egyptian populations of Egypt maintained somewhat separate religious lives, though with significant overlap and interaction. The most important religious development of the Ptolemaic period was the creation of Serapis, a god intentionally designed to appeal to both Greeks and Egyptians. Serapis combined aspects of Oshus Apis, the sacred bull of Memphis who became Osiris at death, with characteristics of Greek gods like Zeus, Hades, and Asclepius. Depicted as a bearded man resembling Zeus, but with Egyptian attributes, Serapis became extremely popular in Ptolemaic Egypt and spread throughout the Hellenistic world. Isis's cult underwent perhaps the most dramatic transformation. Though always important in Egypt, Isis became a universal goddess during the Hellenistic and Roman periods, worshipped from Britain to Afghanistan. The Greeks and Romans were attracted to Isis's compelling mythology, the faithful wife who resurrected her murdered husband, the protective mother who raised Horus in secret, the powerful magician whose knowledge surpassed even Ra's. Isis was reinterpreted in Greek terms, sometimes identified with Demeter, Aphrodite, or other Greek goddesses, but maintaining her essential character. Isis worship offered something that traditional Greco-Roman paganism often lacked: a personal relationship with a caring, accessible goddess. Isis promised salvation, resurrection, protection in this life and the next. Her mysteries, celebrated in elaborate initiation ceremonies, offered spiritual transformation and assurance of blessed afterlife. The spread of Isis worship represented Egyptian religion's greatest success in influencing the wider ancient world, surviving well into the Christian era. Other Egyptian gods also found foreign audiences. Bes, the dwarf god who protected households, appeared throughout the Mediterranean. Harpocrates, the child Horus, became popular as a god of silence and secrets. Egyptian animal worship, especially of cats, crocodiles, and ibises, fascinated and sometimes scandalized Greeks and Romans, who found the idea of worshipping animals primitive or absurd, yet were drawn to the exotic mystery of these practices. The religious exchange wasn't entirely one-directional. Some Greek gods were incorporated into Egyptian worship, though usually identified with existing Egyptian deities. Zeus might be equated with Amun, Apollo with Horus, Dionysus with Osiris. This syncretism worked because both Egyptian and Greek religions were fundamentally polytheistic and accustomed to seeing their gods as manifestations of universal divine principles that might be recognized under different names by different peoples. Yet there were tensions. Some Greek writers mocked Egyptian animal worship and the practice of mummifying animals. Some Egyptians resented Greek domination and the privileging of Greek language and culture. The mixing of populations in cities like Alexandria sometimes led to ethnic and religious conflicts. But overall, the Greco-Egyptian synthesis was remarkably successful, creating a rich hybrid culture that would persist until Christianity eventually displaced both Egyptian and Greek paganism. When Rome conquered Egypt in 30 BCE after Cleopatra's defeat and death, another layer of cultural and religious influence was added. Roman emperors took pharaonic titles and made offerings in Egyptian temples, maintaining the fiction of traditional divine kingship even as Egypt became a Roman province, administered by prefects rather than independent pharaohs. Egyptian cults, especially Isis worship, became immensely popular in Rome itself, spreading throughout the empire. At the same time, Roman citizen, culture, law, and eventually religion, Christianity, would fundamentally transform Egypt. Which brings us to the final chapter of Egyptian mythology's long story: the gradual decline and eventual end of the old gods' worship, the closing of temples that had welcomed worshippers for thousands of years, and the transition to a new religious order that would erase the ancient faith from living practice while paradoxically preserving it in stone, in stories, and ultimately in the archaeological rediscovery that would reveal these gods to the modern world. The twilight of the gods. From Cleopatra to Christianity, Cleopatra VII, last ruler of the Ptolemaic dynasty, was the final pharaoh to worship the old gods as living, powerful entities. She identified herself with Isis, promoting the goddess's cult, building temples, participating in rituals that connected her to 3 millennia of pharaonic tradition. When she died by her own hand in 30 BCE after her defeat by Octavian, later Caesar Augustus, she took with her not just a dynasty, but an entire religious worldview, though its death would take several more centuries to complete. Cleopatra's life embodied the religious syncretism of late Ptolemaic Egypt. She was a Macedonian Greek by ancestry, but spoke Egyptian, the only Ptolemaic ruler who bothered to learn the language. She appeared in Egyptian-style temple reliefs, making offerings to Egyptian gods, wearing the traditional regalia of a pharaoh. Yet she also cultivated Roman and Greek identities, presenting herself as the new Isis in ways that appealed to Greek and Roman sensibilities as much as Egyptian ones. Her children with Mark Antony bore both Egyptian and Roman titles, representing her attempt to unite Eastern and Western traditions. Her death marked Egypt's absorption into the Roman Empire as a province rather than an independent kingdom. Augustus, despite defeating Cleopatra, recognized the importance of Egyptian religion to the province's stability. He restored and built temples in Egypt, presented himself as pharaoh when dealing with native Egyptians, made offerings to Egyptian gods. The fiction of divine kingship continued, though everyone knew real power resided with the Roman emperor in Rome, not with gods along the Nile. For the next several centuries, traditional Egyptian religion continued functioning much as it had, at least superficially. Temples operated with their priesthoods, performing daily rituals, receiving offerings, administering extensive agricultural estates. Local festivals continued, bringing communities together to honor their gods. The Book of the Dead was still copied for those who could afford it. Mummification persisted. To an Egyptian living in the 1st or 2nd century CE, the old religion might have seemed eternal, unchanged, as permanent as the pyramids. But profound changes were occurring. Egyptian religion was gradually becoming more localized, fragmented, less centrally organized. Without a Bakos Pharaoh genuinely invested in maintaining Mayat, without royal patronage driving temple construction and priestly appointments, the religious infrastructure slowly weakened. Some temples fell into disrepair. The ability to read hieroglyphics, always restricted to an educated elite of priests and scribes, began declining as fewer people learned the complex script. The sophisticated theological systems developed over millennia were becoming less understood even by those who theoretically maintained them. Meanwhile, Egypt had become an early center for Christianity. Alexandria, that cosmopolitan city where Greeks, Egyptians, Jews, and others mingled, produced some of early Christianity's most important theologians and church fathers: Origen, Clement of Alexandria, Athanasius. These figures developed Christian theology in an Egyptian context, sometimes borrowing concepts from Egyptian thought, though they would have rejected that suggestion. Christianity spread rapidly through Egypt, particularly in Alexandria, but increasingly in rural areas as well. The new religion offered something Egyptian paganism had always provided: assurance of resurrection and eternal life, but in a more egalitarian, universalist framework. You didn't need expensive tomb equipment or magical spells. You needed faith in Christ. The appeal was obvious, especially to lower classes who couldn't afford elaborate funerary preparations. Christianity also offered something Egyptian religion had perhaps lost: certainty, a clear doctrine, a defined set of beliefs and practices. Egyptian religion's flexibility, its tolerance for contradiction and regional variation, its willingness to incorporate foreign gods, these had been strengths when Egyptian civilization was confident and powerful. In a world of increasing chaos, foreign domination, and cultural dissolution, Christianity's certainty might have seemed refreshing, stable, reliable. The conflict between Christianity and paganism intensified during the 3rd and 4th centuries CE. Christian emperors began restricting pagan worship, though enforcement varied by time and place. Local Christians sometimes violently attacked pagan temples, destroying statues and religious symbols, though just as often Christians and pagans coexisted, even intermarried, keeping their religious differences personal rather than political. The death blow to Egyptian paganism came not suddenly but gradually, through a series of imperial edicts in the late 4th century. Emperor Theodosius I issued decrees in 380 and 391 CE prohibiting pagan worship, ordering temples closed, forbidding sacrifice. These weren't immediately or universally enforced. Some temples in remote areas continued functioning for decades, but they marked the official end of legal paganism in the Roman Empire. One of the last bastions of Egyptian religion was the Temple of Isis on the island of Philae in Upper Egypt. This remote sanctuary continued operating into the 6th century CE, serving both Egyptians and Nubians who still honored the old gods. The last known hieroglyphic inscription was carved there in 394 CE, the graffito of Esmet Akhom, marking the end of a writing system that had served Egypt for over 3 millennia. The inscription is a simple prayer to Isis, asking the goddess's favor, showing that even at this late date, some still believed in the old god's power. The Temple of Philae was finally closed by order of Emperor Justinian IV around 535 CE. Byzantine soldiers arrived at the island, expelled the priests, and converted the temple into a Christian church. The statues of Isis were destroyed or defaced. The sacred spaces were redesecrated for Christian use. The priests who had maintained daily offerings to the goddess for generations scattered or converted. The last unbroken link to pharaonic religious practice was severed. What died at Philae was not just a temple, but an entire worldview. The understanding that gods walked the earth as living presences. The belief that proper ritual could maintain cosmic order. The hope that mummification and magical spells could ensure eternal life. The certainty that the Nile's flood was a blessing from Osiris, that the sun's rising was Ra's victory over chaos, that pharaohs were living gods maintaining Ma'at. Yet in another sense, Egyptian religion never truly died. It transformed, migrated, wore new faces. But here's what most people don't realize. What makes this story's ending far stranger than its beginning. Core concepts from Egyptian mythology didn't just influence later religions through vague cultural osmosis. They traveled specific routes through specific people at specific historical moments and embedded themselves so deeply into Judaism, Christianity, and Islam that believers in these faiths today unknowingly affirm ideas that first emerged on the banks of the Nile thousands of years before Moses, Jesus, or Muhammad. Consider the concept of bodily resurrection. The Egyptians invented it. Before them, civilizations believed the dead descended to gloomy underworlds as shades or ghosts, diminished spirits lacking substance. The Egyptians insisted instead that the physical body, properly preserved and reunited with the soul through magic and ritual, would rise again to live eternally. When Judaism began developing resurrection theology during the Second Temple period, heavily influenced by centuries of interaction with Egypt, when Christianity proclaimed Christ's bodily resurrection as the cornerstone of faith, when Islam taught that the dead would rise physically on Judgment Day, all three religions were, whether they acknowledged it or not, echoing Osiris rising from death's embrace. Or consider the weighing of the soul in divine judgment. The Egyptian image of Anubis placing the heart on scales balanced against Ma'at's feather predates the biblical Last Judgment by millennia. The idea that every deed is recorded, that there will come a moment of cosmic accounting, that truth cannot be hidden from divine sight. These weren't self-evident truths that every culture independently discovered. They emerged in a specific time and place. Middle Kingdom Egypt, around 2000 BCE, inscribed on coffins before spreading through the Mediterranean world via cultural exchange, conquest, and the massive Egyptian diaspora that existed throughout the ancient world. The very architecture of judgment appears in all three Abrahamic faiths: a hall of divine presence, a weighing, a verdict that determines eternal fate, paradise for the virtuous, destruction for the wicked. The 42 negative confessions: I have not killed, I have not stolen, I have not lied, established the template for moral evaluation based on conduct rather than sacrifice, anticipating by centuries the prophetic tradition in Judaism that emphasized ethics over ritual, and the Christian and Islamic emphasis on righteous living. Even the imagery transferred with uncanny specificity. Isis nursing Horus became Mary nursing Jesus. Same pose, same tender maternal protection, same divine child who would restore cosmic order. Early Christian art in Egypt simply relabeled the statues. Isis's title, Mut Netya, Mother of God, transferred directly to Mary as Theotokos in Greek, Mother of God in English. The protective, interceding goddess who heard prayers and worked miracles for devotees found new expression in Marian devotion. When medieval European Christians prayed to the Virgin for intercession, they were participating in a tradition that stretched back unbroken to women praying to Isis in Alexandria, Memphis, and Thebes. The Ankh symbol, representing life, was adapted by Coptic Christians into their distinctive cross design. Saints took on roles eerily similar to specific gods. Saint George slaying the dragon echoes both Horus defeating Set and Ra conquering Apophis. The Christian monastic tradition in Egypt, which spread throughout Christendom, developed partly in former temples and using contemplative practices that may have preserved elements of priestly discipline. When Muslim mystics in Egypt developed their spiritual practices centuries later, they too drew on a landscape saturated with sacred history stretching back millennia before Islam. This isn't to say Judaism, Christianity, or Islam are just Egyptian religion in disguise. That would be absurd oversimplification. Each developed unique theologies, distinct from Egyptian polytheism, in fundamental ways. Monotheism versus polytheism represents a genuine revolution in religious thought. But the building blocks, how to think about life after death, how divine judgment works, what constitutes ethical behavior, how to visualize the relationship between divine and human, these emerged in Egypt and spread throughout the ancient world, influencing every subsequent religious tradition that developed in the Mediterranean and Near East. What died at Philae in 535 CE was the explicit worship of Ra, Osiris, and Isis. What survived was a worldview, a set of spiritual technologies, a framework for understanding death and judgment and resurrection that had proven so powerful, so useful, so psychologically necessary that it simply couldn't die. It could only transform, adapt, and persist under new names in new contexts. Christianity in Egypt absorbed some elements directly. The Ankh became a cross. Coptic, the last stage of the Egyptian language, continued being written using a modified Greek alphabet, preserving the language even as hieroglyphics vanished. Local saints in Egypt were sometimes associated with sites of former pagan temples, suggesting continuity of sacred space, if not explicit belief. The Christian feast calendar in Egypt incorporated dates from the old religious calendar. Ways of thinking about the divine, about proper ritual, about the relationship between humans and sacred power. These didn't vanish overnight, but evolved, adapted, persisted in modified forms through the very people who now called themselves Christian. For over 1,000 years after Philae's closure, Egyptian mythology survived only in stories told by Greek and Roman authors, in ruins that peasants and travelers wondered at without understanding, in hieroglyphics that no one could read. The gods became names without personalities, images without meaning, stories whose significance was lost. The pyramids stood mute, their theological purpose forgotten. The tombs preserved elaborate scenes whose religious importance was no longer comprehensible. Then came the modern age of archaeology and Egyptology. Napoleon's expedition to Egypt in 1798 included scholars who documented ancient sites. The discovery of the Rosetta Stone provided the key to deciphering hieroglyphics. Throughout the 19th and 20th centuries, archaeologists excavated tombs, temples, and cities, recovering texts, objects, and images that gradually allowed scholars to reconstruct Egyptian religion in remarkable detail. The gods spoke again, if only to scholars and enthusiasts, revealing a religious system of breathtaking sophistication, profound beauty, and enduring influence. Legacy. Egypt's eternal influence. Let your breathing deepen once more as we reach the end of this long journey through Egyptian mythology. From the waters of Nun to the closure of Philae's temple, we have traced 35 centuries of religious thought and practice, watched gods emerge from chaos to establish cosmic order, seen pharaohs unite human and divine, witnessed the judgment of the dead and the promise of eternal life, and finally observed the old gods' twilight as new faiths arose. What remains now? Why do these ancient stories, these dead gods, these obsolete beliefs still matter? Why does Egyptian mythology continue to fascinate, inspire, and influence, even though no one today worships Ra or offers to Isis or expects to have their heart weighed against Ma'at's feather? This answer is that great myths never truly die. They evolve, transform, reappear in new contexts. Egyptian mythology influenced the religious developments that succeeded it. Judaism borrowed concepts of divine judgment and resurrection. Christianity absorbed imagery and symbolism. Islam honored Egypt as a land of prophets. Western literature and art constantly return to Egyptian themes: the mysterious pyramids, the enigmatic Sphinx, the beautiful but doomed Cleopatra, the curse of the mummy. Modern esotericism draws on Egyptian symbols and concepts, sometimes inventing ancient wisdom that ancient Egyptians would not recognize, but that nonetheless shows the enduring power of Egypt's mystique. More fundamentally, Egyptian mythology addressed questions that remain relevant. What happens after death? How do we maintain order in the face of chaos? What makes authority legitimate? How do we balance justice with mercy? What is the relationship between the individual and cosmic order? These are not questions that ancient civilizations faced, and modern ones have moved beyond. They are perennial human questions, and Egyptian answers. Resurrection through proper ritual, Ma'at as cosmic and social order, divine kingship, judgment based on moral conduct, remain thought-provoking even for those who don't accept them literally. The archaeological rediscovery of Egypt in the 19th and 20th centuries revealed a civilization that had left more material remains than almost any other ancient culture. The dry desert climate preserved papyri, mummies, wooden objects that would have decayed elsewhere. The Egyptians' focus on death and afterlife meant they buried extensive materials with their dead, creating time capsules that survived millennia. Their habit of carving texts and images in stone meant their stories and beliefs were literally set in stone, waiting for someone to learn to read them again. When Jean-François Champollion deciphered hieroglyphics in 1822, he didn't just crack a code, he reopened a dialogue with the dead. Suddenly, texts written thousands of years ago could be read, understood, studied. The voices of Egyptian priests, scribes, and kings spoke again, telling their myths, describing their rituals, recording their history. Gods who had been silent for over a millennium revealed their names, their natures, their stories. The dead spoke of their hopes for eternity, their fears of judgment, their love for life. Modern scholars have reconstructed Egyptian religion with remarkable thoroughness, though gaps and uncertainties remain. We can read the myths, trace the development of beliefs, understand the rituals, analyze the theology. We can enter tombs and temples, see the original images, read inscriptions on the walls. We can hold amulets that Egyptians wore for protection, examine Book of the Dead papyri prepared for the deceased's journey, study mummies preserved by techniques the living had learned from Anubis. But we can never fully recapture what it was like to believe. To see Ra's rising each morning, not as an astronomical event, but as a god's victory over chaos. To prepare for death confident that proper mummification and correct spells would ensure resurrection. To view the pharaoh not as a political ruler, but as a living god, maintaining cosmic order. To live in a world where the boundary between sacred and secular didn't exist because everything, from the Great Nile flood to a child's first steps, carried religious significance. What we can do is recognize Egyptian mythology's sophistication and importance. This was not primitive superstition or childish anthropomorphism. It was a coherent, complex system developed over millennia by intelligent people grappling with fundamental questions of existence, meaning, and value. It produced magnificent art and architecture, sophisticated philosophical concepts, and ethical systems that emphasized justice, truth, and proper social conduct. Egyptian mythology also reminds us that religious truth can be understood and expressed in multiple ways simultaneously. The Egyptians had no problem with Ra being both the sun and a falcon-headed god who sailed across the sky in a boat. Osiris could be simultaneously the dead king buried in the underworld and the living grain sprouting from earth. The pharaoh was at once human and divine, Horus and Osiris, ruler and ruled. These were not contradictions to be resolved, but different ways of understanding the same truth from different angles. Perhaps modern people, trained to think in terms of logical consistency and single truth, could learn something from this more fluid approach. Finally, Egyptian mythology invites us to contemplate permanence and change, eternity and mortality. The Egyptians built for eternity: pyramids, temples, tombs designed to last forever. They believed in eternal life, in gods who never truly died, in cosmic order that would persist beyond any individual's lifespan. Yet their civilization ended, their gods fell silent, their writing became unreadable. Even the eternal pyramids eroded, were stripped of their outer casings, became shadows of what they once were. But because they built so well, so much survived. Because they wrote so much down, we can resurrect their thoughts. Because they took eternity seriously, we can still visit their sacred spaces, still decode their beliefs, still learn from their wisdom. They achieved a kind of immortality, though not the one they envisioned. Not as transfigured spirits sailing with Ra, but as voices preserved in stone and papyrus, speaking to us across the millennia, reminding us of how humans have always sought meaning, order, and hope in the face of chaos and mortality. Sleep now, knowing that some things, beauty, truth, justice, love, transcend individual civilizations and continue speaking to every generation. The gods of Egypt have returned to Non's waters. The temples are ruins. The priests are dust. But the questions they grappled with remain, and their answers, preserved in desert sands, continue offering wisdom to those willing to listen. Thank you for joining this journey through Egyptian mythology. From Ra's first emergence to Cleopatra's final breath, from creation to twilight, we have witnessed one of humanity's most remarkable religious traditions. Rest well, and may your dreams be filled with the eternal Nile, the golden sun, and the promise that death, properly understood, is merely a transition to something greater. If you enjoyed this journey through the land of the gods, please subscribe to our channel and let us know in the comments which ancient mythology you'd like us to explore next. Rest well, knowing that the stories we tell ourselves about the divine reveal profound truths about the human condition. Good night.